lotus position.
Namaskar. My name is Tara Sigdel. I am affiliated with NIRI and I volunteer to coordinate NIRI webinars. In these webinars, we invite speakers from different areas to share their knowledge with us. And today's webinar is very special because we have got a special guest speaker to speak with us on a very special topic that is very near and dear to us. I will not steal the thunder. We will come to that in a little bit. Before we go to Dr. Acharya, who has invited Dr. Cameron to speak today, I would like to go to Dr. Pangeni, who will give us a very brief introduction about what NIRI is. Dr. Pangeni.
Thank you, Dr. Sigdel. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. And thank you, Dr. Cameron. Thank you, Professor Cameron, for agreeing to come today to give a talk. And thank you so much for your research works that matters so much to Nepal. Thank you so much. When we went through your research works, there are so much focus in Nepal, and thank you so much for this on behalf of NIRI. NIRI primarily is a research institution. It's a research and innovation institution. Our main focus is to bring some innovative research works that matters most to Nepal in different areas. We are 27 founder members and from different parts of the world. And because all of us are Nepalese, we also belong to different parts of Nepal. So we are truly happy and proud that there is a great pool of diversity. We are extremely diverse in terms of where we come from, our research areas, and we are professionals and researchers working in different parts of the world and Nepal. And we always say that NIRI is not just an institution, it's a movement. We want to promote the culture of working together and a culture of collaborations among the Nepalese and foreigners all over the world. So if you want to become a part of NIRI and want to collaborate your research works together, please contact us. That's all for now. I want to go back to Dr. Sigdel. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajendra ji. Thank you so much. Now we cannot wait to hear from our speaker. In order to welcome our speaker and introduce, I invite Dr. Tulsi Acharya to this forum. And Dr. Acharya, please take away.
Okay, thank you very much, and everyone. Namaste once again. Thank you, Dr. Mary Cameron, for accepting our invitations and coming to our webinar series. Dr. Cameron, while introducing you to our audiences out here, if I might have mistaken, please correct me while talking about you. Dr. Cameron had her PhD from Michigan State University. She has been working in Nepal for decades on social and medical economic justice issues around gender, caste, and Ayurvedic medicine. She has published 2 books and several articles and book chapters as well on these topics. Mainly she supervises master's degree students and also PhD students at Florida Atlantic University, especially in anthropology and gender studies and geography. I would like to add public administration and policy too, because she was one of my committee members when I was doing my PhD dissertations, when I was doing my PhD on PhD dissertations. She writes, how to know and appreciate human nature codependencies particularly interest me. So I've known Dr. Cameron for a decade now. She chaired my master's thesis in women's studies when I was doing my master's in women's studies. And also she was one of the, as I already said, committee members on my PhD dissertation. Our research interest areas are medical, cultural, and feminist anthropology, Nepal and South Asia, Asian medicine, especially focusing on Ayurveda, which is what she's going to talk about today. Gender and caste, sustainability in health and agriculture, global health, global conservation, development, Buddhist mindfulness and meditation. Perhaps you would might want to explore a bit more about these, research area interest that she has. And out of her 2 published books, if she has more than that, she would explain that in a little bit. Our book, the first one, as so far I know, is On the Age of the Auspicious Gender and Caste in Nepal. Perhaps that was a part of her dissertation, PhD dissertation. And then her another book, which has been recently published in 2019, is Three Fruits, Nepali Ayurvedic Doctors on Health, Nature and Social Change. She has received many honors, awards, fellowships, and grants as well. So currently, Dr. Cameron is full professor in the Department of Anthropology at Florida Atlantic University. So today we would like to know about her research journey, and especially why Nepal, and her Ayurveda research, and any current research project and research challenges and opportunities in the context of Nepal. So now I would like to welcome her, our guest, Dr. Cameron, and to give a talk. So Dr. Cameron, now it is all yours.
Namaste to all of you. Thank you so very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to talk with you all about the research that I have conducted in Nepal for several decades. I think that both the topic of gender and caste, which I'll just briefly mention, as well as Ayurvedic medicine, are topics that are probably very familiar to you and a part of your everyday lives. So and I would also add to Tulasi's introduction that I work with many doctoral students in the Florida Atlantic University College of Nursing. They have an internationally recognized College of Nursing, and it's always been a great pleasure to work with those doctoral students who do qualitative research, which is the kind of research that I mainly work within. So my first interest in Ayurveda began when I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I was in Bajang in the Seti zone. I was a mathematics and science teacher, and there was a local Kabiraj who would dispense powdered medicines into small paper packets, and he would pour them out into the packets and then fold them up and write the instructions or the directions to the patients that came to see him. And that caught my curiosity because I was a biology major in college and very much indoctrinated into the field of modern Western science and its most prominent application within modern biomedicine. And so I wondered what he was dispensing and whether it worked, and questions like that. I also learned that some of his plant-based medicines came from Kathmandu, but also from Kopterd Lek. So Kopterd Lek, now Kopterd National Park, is a place I'm sure you're familiar with, and perhaps you know about its most famous inhabitant, Kopterd Baba. And he was a friend of mine. I visited him up at his ashram on several occasions. And I actually wasn't aware at the time that there was an experimental medicinal plant garden up there. And when the Kabiraj in Bajang told me about it, it really piqued my interest to learn more about it. I did begin my doctoral studies in medical anthropology, and I first collected data on Ayurveda related matters in the summer of 1985, when there was a very devastating measles epidemic out in the far west in Bajang. And even though that wasn't the topic that I was researching at the time, it just happened to be taking place. And so I actually collected many observations and a lot of data on that measles epidemic. And I wrote my first conference paper on those findings related to concepts like hot and cold and local ideas of how measles was transmitted from one person to another. And I presented that paper at the well-known annual conference on South Asia at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And I've been looking for that paper during this COVID-19 epidemic, and it must be on a floppy drive somewhere. And I'm not even sure how I would get a floppy drive to work at this point. And then my future research on Ayurveda allowed me to elaborate and further learn about these concepts in a very rural setting, like hot and cold and avoiding the rain and things of that sort, and their roots in formal Ayurvedic theory. So that's of interest to me, how the formal tradition or what we call the learned tradition, that is part of the higher education of Ayurvedic doctors, parallels many of the same concepts that the village Vaidya use when healing people. So I found that to be quite interesting, and it really kind of confirmed a main thesis in medical anthropology, which is that people's medical systems are not just about illness and healing, but they are also conceptual frameworks by which other aspects of family and community are organized. And we can find that is true throughout Nepal and throughout many different kinds of communities in Nepal as well. And of course, Ayurvedic medicine informs Tibetan medicine. But my doctoral research wasn't about medicine, but it was about another observation I had made when I was in Bajong that I wanted to pursue. And that observation was the greater marital, social, and economic freedom of Dalit women when compared with high caste women. So Dalit women could work on other people's land, they could earn money. If divorced or widowed, they could remarry. Those things were relatively prohibited for high caste women. And so that connection between gender and caste and the intersectionality actually formed the basis of my dissertation research. And I conducted 1 year of research on the intersectionality of gender and caste, and that became my dissertation, and its revision became my first book called On the Edge of the Auspicious. I restarted my Ayurvedic research in the late 90s when I was asked to consult on the role of Vaidya in rural communities and the use of medicinal plants in rural communities, and to also visit Kopterd Lek once again, and to meet with Kopterd Baba. So I was, my familiarity with him and with that region was one of the main reasons why I was asked to consult on this project that was aimed at really at an early form of ecotourism. It wasn't called that at the time, but it was a project that would bring healthcare professionals to Nepal to look at and explore Ayurvedic medicine, both in formal practice as well as rural practice. So while doing that consulting work, I got very much started again on and interested in Ayurvedic medicine in Nepal. And I'm sure that many of you are familiar with Ayurvedic medicine. Probably you use it yourselves, or family members use it. Maybe there are Ayurvedic practitioners within your family lineages. And much like the observation of gender and caste, which was something that was obvious to me and everyone else, but had never been written about for Nepal, Ayurvedic medicine was the same. It was everywhere. There was an obvious popularity. There was this resonance between the rural practice and the urban practices. It was, and yet very little anthropological research had been done on Ayurvedic medicine. In Nepal, much like the questions related to caste, India had really preoccupied the anthropological research on issues related to caste. Nepal, within anthropological studies, had sort of become a place where Janajati were primarily being researched by anthropologists. And of course, Janajati groups may use medicinal plants, but they also heavily rely on shamans and shamanistic practice. So the medical anthropology of Nepal in the 70s, 80s, and 90s was focused on shamans, and much of the work during that period of time was on shamanism and spiritual healing rather than what we might call physical healing. Ayurveda is very much a practice of physicality and materiality, which I'll get to in a moment. The one exception to work on Ayurveda and the lack thereof was extensive ethnobotanical research. Ethnobotanists have been creating a very important record in Nepal for many decades that looked at uses and practices by local people of medicinal plants, what we call traditional TEK, traditional environmental knowledge or traditional ecological knowledge. So that work, of course, was important to, once again, substantiating the widespread popularity of Ayurveda in the form of the Vaidya, who practice at local levels, and also many shamans also will utilize medicinal plants in their healing. And that ethnobotanical research has also proved to be extremely important in evaluating the effects of global warming and climate change in Nepal. So I began applying for funding to conduct research on Ayurvedic medicine in a formal way, first from Auburn University, where I had my first academic position and received tenure at Auburn University. I received 2 Fulbright grants to conduct research on Ayurveda. I was fortunate to receive a Council of American Overseas Research Centers multi-country grant as well. And that grant allowed me to look at Ayurveda comparatively from Nepal to Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. And that research, I was really interested in looking at the travel of Himalayan medicinal plants and how they enter the markets really in Bangladesh and in Sri Lanka. Many of these plants are highly valuable. And so with all of that funding, which formally started in 1997 up through 2017, so 2 decades of research, culminated in my 2019 book, 3 Fruits, Nepali Ayurvedic Doctors on Health, Nature, and Social Change. And Tulasi had mentioned that book. So just to mention the kinds of methods that I use, as an anthropologist, I conduct in-depth interviews with key participants. I do what's called participant observation, which I sometimes tell my students is a kind of like loitering with intent. So that you're hanging around the clinic or hanging around in a meeting and listening to what's happening and observing what is happening in a variety of settings. So unlike the book Gender and Caste in my dissertation research, where I did conduct quantitative research, because that research depended a lot on landholding and demographics, and local landholding records were far from complete and far from accurate. So I did conduct a landholding survey, demographic survey, and I also conducted a time allocation survey so that I could discern who did what kinds of work during an entire year in Bajong. And so that did, the research on gender and caste did utilize quantitative research. In contrast, my research on Ayurvedic medicine has utilized ethnographic research, which is mainly qualitative. And so the first part of the book's title, Nepali Ayurvedic Doctors. I was very fortunate to work with some brilliant Ayurvedic doctors, some of whom I had met when I was originally a consultant on the Kopter Lek medicinal plant station research. The Ayurvedic doctors can go by several names. Vaidya is the term often applied to the local healers who utilize this tradition. And the Vaidya, typically they may have some schooling, but they certainly do not have a formal degree in health or in Ayurvedic medicine. So that's what local people tend to refer to as Vaidya. However, I also found that sometimes the Ayurvedic doctors that I worked with who did have an MD in Ayurveda were also referred to as Vaidya when patients came in to talk with them. So I thought that was a sort of a nice equalizing, in a sense, a kind of egalitarian approach to healers, and a respect for both the rural tradition and the urban tradition. A Kabiraj, like the person who I first met in the early 1980s in Bajong, they have a certain amount of formal Ayurvedic medical education that many of them receive at Naradevi Ayurvedic Hospital. Now there are opening other Ayurvedic formal training programs in the country where one can receive a Kabiraj degree. Kabiraj, unlike the term Vaidya, Kabiraj is a formal governmental classification that is used to for various employment purposes. And then the Nepali Ayurvedic doctors that I worked with were also called doctor. So there you have a use of the English term when referring to those individuals. So the people, my main colleagues that contributed to the substantive content of the book, Three Fruits, all received the MD in Ayurveda from Banaras Hindu University. And I would say that BHU is probably the preeminent Ayurvedic college in the world, perhaps, but certainly at that time it was the most prestigious place to go and study Ayurvedic medicine. But all of these people were Nepalis. So in various capacities, usually with the support of the Nepali government, they enrolled in the Ayurvedic programs at BHU. And the book is divided into chapters that focus on one of three of the main Ayurvedic doctors that I worked with. Dr. Narendranath Tiwari starts it off, primarily because of his love of plants. And going back to something that Tulasi mentioned as one of my interests in human nature relationships, I thought that would be, I thought it was appropriate to have one of the first dedicated chapters to a doctor be for Dr. Tiwari. Some of you may know him and know about his work. He's now retired. And I should also mention that the title of the book, Three Fruits, comes from an Ayurvedic preparation called Triphala, which some of you, I'm sure all of you are familiar with. Maybe some of you take it on a daily basis. It can be used as a tonic and a digestive. And I really wanted the main title of the book to capture a plant or plant-based name. So it's the translation of Triphala. And so Dr. Tiwari probably, I think, became an Ayurvedic doctor because of his love of plants. He's from the Terai region of Nepal. He's well known also as an excellent botanist. All of the doctors, all Ayurvedic doctors, are trained in botany because they have to be able to recognize the medicinal plants. And anytime there's discussion about the opening of a new Ayurveda program, either at the lower level or the upper level, there always is discussion about where will the medicinal plant garden be. There has to be land for that. And all of the doctors I work with would express concern that today's Ayurveda students, many of whom come from urban areas, may be losing their ability to recognize the medicinal plants. So they thought it was ever more important to have those plants growing nearby so that they could recognize them. And Dr. Tiwari, because of his extensive knowledge about ecosystems and botany, was often a consultant for NGOs and INGOs that were working in the areas of environmental conservation, global warming, and things of that sort. So this is such an interesting overlap, really, between a practice of medicine and the field of environmental studies and conservation and sustainability practices. And that, of course, is of interest to me. What it also means is that when conducting research on Ayurvedic medicine, I had to be prepared to work with people not only in the Ministry of Health, but also in the Ministry of Education, because the educational programs are controlled by that ministry. And then also the Ministry of Conservation and Soils is perhaps the name now. I'm not quite sure. They change the names of the ministries every once in a while. I think the Ministry of is now Health and Populations, perhaps. And Ayurveda circulates among several ministries, and issues of concern to the promotion and sustainability of Ayurvedic medicine in the country will draw from all of those areas. Also, Dr. Tiwari was teaching some Ayurvedic classes at Naradevi when I was conducting the research, and so I was able to make classroom observations while he was teaching the students there as well. The second important doctor that I worked with is Dr. Rishiram Kwarala, again, somebody that may be well known to you all. He is a very innovative kind of person who also has a love of plants, but his particular area of passion is within healing itself and seeing lots of patients. And he has a clinic in Kathmandu, primarily for Nepalis, and I made many observations there. And then he also opened a clinic for international patients outside of Ring Road, if it's still called Ring Road. There's probably another ring around the original Ring Road at this point. And so, as you might expect, the fees were substantially higher for the treatments that one would receive at the clinic that he ran that was for the international patients, as well as some Nepalis, and he would have some sliding fees. And I made observations at both of those clinics that Dr. Kwarala ran. Dr. Kwarala was also teaching in the classroom, but interestingly, he was not teaching the new students, but a group of elderly students whose formal Ayurvedic medical education had been disrupted multiple times during the period of King Birendra, when he was modernizing the educational system, and he stopped the practice, the education in Ayurveda for a period of time, and then it was changed. And so this this cohort of people had never been able to finish their Ayurvedic medical education and receive their diplomas and certification. And why was it important to have certification? Because again, while I was conducting research, the Nepal Ayurveda Council, through the Nepal Health Research Council, had mandated new policies that if one was going to practice Ayurvedic medicine, that you had to either have formal certification, or you had to be able to prove several generations of lineage practice, like with the Bajracharyas in the Newari community, in order to legally practice in Nepal. So this was a contentious issue that I wrote a paper about and is part of the book as well. And all of the doctors I worked with were involved in trying to temper that new policy, because it would have kept out a lot of the traditional healers. So the question is whether anybody has been, how forcefully these laws have been enacted. There's not really much research on that I'm aware of. I rather doubt that the village Vaidya are apprehended or anything like that. And there were, as one might expect, there were a fair amount of Nepali Congress Party politics involved in the formulation of those policies, primarily because the newly educated doctors were finding that the traditional healers had a certain monopoly over all the patients, because they had been the healers for communities throughout the 3 cities of the Kathmandu Valley. And so they wanted to be able to break into the market. And so it was kind of one of the factors involved, as explained to me, for why that legislation came through. So Dr. Kwarala was involved in helping this elderly cohort get certified so that they could continue to practice within the confines of the law. Dr. Kwarala is also very interested in the psychological aspects of healing, combining Ayurveda with meditation and yoga. He has degrees in those areas. He's also interested in Tantra and Tantric medicine. And so that's an area of research that one could possibly pursue a bit more. And then the most prominent person I worked with and spent absolutely the most time with was Dr. Lokendra Man Singh, perhaps somebody that you all may be familiar with. He's deceased now. He was the Dean of Faculty at Banaras Hindu University for a period of time. He was the physician to many of the political leaders who fled Nepal and stayed in Varanasi. And so when he retired from BHU, he vowed to return to Nepal and help build Ayurvedic medicine in the country. And because of his medical attention as the doctor to many prominent Nepali political families, he was a good person to work with, because anytime he needed a favor from somebody, he would just remind them of what they owed him in that great Nepali reciprocal tradition. So I really tagged along with Dr. Singh everywhere. He was in many meetings with the Secretary of Health, trying to assure that the Ayurvedic medical education curricula were up to par. There were always debates about the use of funding. Interests wanted to locate new campuses in the Kathmandu region and to be administered by what at the time was Mahendra Sanskrit University, and many of the meetings took place there because that university was in control of some aspects of Ayurvedic medical education, because one has to know Sanskrit language in order to be able to read Charaka Samhita and the other important texts. So there was always a struggle among people in terms of the funding, because the Nepali government had allocated a fair amount of funding to help build some of the Ayurveda medical resources and the educational systems. So I was able to get into most of these meetings with top level officials because I was a friend of Dr. Singh's. There was one time, however, when the director of the Department of Ayurveda asked that I not attend a meeting at the Ministry of Health. And you can read about that in the book if you'd like, because it was going to be a very contentious one. And he knew that I probably sided with Dr. Singh, even though I never said anything in meetings. But of course, Dr. Singh always filled me in on all of the details of all meetings that I wasn't able to attend because I was out of the country or something of that sort. He also was involved in the education of that elderly cohort that I mentioned with Dr. Kwarala. And so that was very important part of his work that he did as really, I would say, Nepal's most prominent advocate for Ayurvedic medicine in the modern era. And he also saw some patients. He's actually trained as a surgeon. He was trained as an Ayurvedic surgeon. And so some of the other Ayurvedic doctors would refer their patients to him. And so I was able to observe, make some clinical observations as well. So those are the three main doctors. They are all men, and I'm very proud that one of the chapters in the book is about the women Nepali Ayurvedic doctors that I worked with, most prominent of whom is Dr. Sarita Shrestha. And she is internationally known. She comes to the United States and travels to Europe and gives talks on Ayurvedic medicine. She opened a very important clinic for women just outside of Bhaktapur, and I made many observations there with her, treating patients. And she specialized in OBGYN. So all of these doctors with MDs in Ayurveda had specializations. So Dr. Singh's was surgery. Dr. Kwarala's was the equivalent of internal medicine. Dr. Tiwari's was pharmacy. And Dr. Sarita Shrestha's was OBGYN. So the subtitles of the book are Nepali Ayurvedic Doctors on Health, Nature, and Social Change. So one of the first things we want to identify is the concept of health and what it means to Nepalis, but within a particular practice like Ayurveda, how is health defined? And so the word swasthya, which is the word for health, was translated for me primarily by Dr. Singh, who elaborated on it philosophically to a great extent. Swa, oneself, and sta, the place where one is. So in other words, Ayurveda is a kind of medicine where one is responsible for one's health through the balancing of the dosha in the body, and that concept of swasthya, where one is, sort of reflects that. And when things get out of balance, for whatever reason, due to season, due to poor daily habits, foods, things of that sort, then one goes to an Ayurvedic doctor to help adjust the dosha that have come out of balance. And so the theory, Ayurveda Siddhanta, the Ayurvedic theory, begins, of course, with the concept of the Panchamahabhuta and the 5 essential elements in the universe as those join to create the dosha, the 3 dosha in the human body. And so this is a exquisite theory, really, of the human as a microcosm of the universal macrocosm. And so, you know, one of the threads within my book is how one cannot really attempt to prove whether Ayurvedic medicine works by using modern biochemistry, because the plants do not heal through biochemistry. The plants heal through their guna, the qualities of the plants, and there are 20 opposing qualities, including that very basic hot, cold. As those plants adjust the symptoms in the sick person. And how do we know what the symptoms are? Those are also evaluated based on their guna, and whether the pain is sharp and hot, or whether there's mobility or a frozen shoulder and things of that nature. So the plants have guna, and the human symptoms by way of the dosha and imbalances in the dosha, those imbalances come out in the form of qualities, which is what the word guna means, qualities that are assessed by the doctor, and then plants are chosen that can the guna of the plants, the medicinal plants, are chosen to help balance and adjust those off balance dosha or guna. So even though there's a lot of research trying to prove whether plants work using biochemistry, the theory is not one of the biochemistry of the plant. So this is sort of what I call a non-Western science, an Eastern scientific practice. It's a theory because it's built up over time and it's applied systematically. It's not a random use of plants, as many plant-based traditions around the world are, where people just opportunistically will try a plant because they've seen maybe an animal use it or something, and then they incorporate it into their daily practices. Rather, this is a theoretical framework that guides both the formal practice as well as what the Vaidya are doing in the villages. Okay, the nature part of the subtitle has to do with this important close connection between humans and nature by virtue of their dependence on medicinal plants, and how Ayurveda has become incorporated in environmental conservation and sustainability practices, sometimes in the form of what is called CAD, or conservation as development. So that's a kind of development that attempts to cultivate medicinal plants either in the wild or on people's land, and then market them to earn money for the purpose of buying whatever a household might need. So there has to be, it's a market-based kind of development practice that has some problems, as one might anticipate, related to it. And the third book that I'm working on right now, called Trading Health, is about this movement of Nepal's plants out of those environments and often to Indian markets. Although I'm sure you can look around now and see the proliferation of Ayurvedic entrepreneurs in Kathmandu. Ramdev, of course, has helped this along the way. That's a whole other area of research that someone might pursue. His main partner is he claims to be an Ayurvedic doctor. He's actually not trained as a formal Ayurvedic doctor, but he is a Nepali. Ramdev, of course, is from India. And then social change is the third concept in the book title. And some of my research was done during the Maoist Civil War period. And so there were some patients who came to see doctors who were afraid of what was happening in the villages. And so some mental health issues did arise as a result of that. And of course, the overthrow of the monarchy was during one of the meetings. After the meeting was finished, people were talking about the newspaper headlines of that morning in the rising Nepal, which were that the Nepali government was going to start using the military against the Maoists. So there was a lot of heated discussion about that move by the Nepali government. Healthcare development, of course, is part of the social change that is part of the book as well, and how biomedicine is the only form of medicine that international dollars will support. I've tried and tried to get the US Agency for International Development to think about Ayurveda. And of course they say, well, is it proven as efficacious? And so the conversation usually ends with that, but someday we may have a breakthrough. And so a main thread through the book is the rise of biomedicine and how Ayurveda has to compete with it. It gets a minor, tiny amount of the health ministry's budget. And so the book ends by my gratitude for being able to work with such prominent, compassionate healers who always gave me their time and really had a generosity of spirit that is unmatched, and of course is a hallmark of Nepali culture, I would say, and why many people love the country of Nepal and the people of Nepal, who are suffering, of course, right now in the COVID-19 crisis. And also the book, I think, argues for paying closer attention to what is a more sustainable form of healthcare, Ayurvedic medicine or traditional medicine. So I'll end there, and I would love to answer any questions or hear about your own experiences with Ayurveda.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Cameron, for such a beautiful presentation about Ayurveda and all the stuff that has been associated with it.
Yeah.
It really makes me quite excited about your book as well. Looks like there are a couple of questions coming up. I'll definitely, just help you with those questions to bring up in front of Dr. Cameron. And thank you so very much, even those who are watching us live on Facebook, and plus who have joined the Zoom meeting as well. So if you have any other questions, you can also write under the comments section, and please someone help me with that as well. So it is really quite interesting about these Ayurvedic medicines, the way you categorize Kaviraj, Vaida, and also Vaida, one Vaida with degree and another Vaida is without degree, and that kind of egalitarian status given to them, which is kind of quite interesting observation there, and then doctor itself. I definitely would like to have this book and read it thoroughly. The way you explained really, interests me a lot about it. And then the way you brought that spiritual elements from that sort of a Buddhist philosophy, I mean, that's kind of really interesting as well. So on that note, looks like there are a couple of questions. Let's start with Dr. Hemraj Dhakal. Looks like he has a question there, and then I will go to Vishnu Joshi. So yes, Dr. Hemraj, please.
Hello, everyone. Dr. Cameron, thank you so much. Dr. Tulsi Acharya, thank you for wonderfully moderating the event. I'm really fascinated by the presentation. I feel some sort of connection. One of the things, I have many questions popping up in my mind. I myself, I'm a nature lover or plant lover. I have many herbal plant in my house. I brought Gurjo, Giloi last year and planted here. Is growing really well. Even though it's pretty cold here in Washington DC metro region, but it's okay in the summer. My question is that you talked about Khaptar Baba. I was from that region. I have read many stories about him. Could you please share, some of your perception about him since you met him in person? And also you talked about the garden he had. So could you please discuss a little bit about what kind of herbal plant he has. He may have many herbal plant, but maybe some of them, maybe like 4 or 5 of them.
Well, the and what region are you're from that area? From Doti area?
Yeah, I'm from that area, not from Doti, but from Assam.
Assam,
Yeah.
So Kapturdlek sits in the middle of those districts. The medicinal plant experimental station was operated not by Kaptur Baba, but by the government of Nepal. I believe from the Ministry of Conservation, essentially, or forestry, and perhaps also health. But it was a short distance from his home. Kaptur Baba was a doctor, a biomedical doctor, and so many people from those regions would come up to see him for various illnesses. He was well known as a yoga practitioner. There are photographs of him in a lungi with snow up to his knees doing various yoga asanas. And actually he taught me some yoga as well. So that was quite nice. He had a lovely apple orchard. And he was a writer. He's recognized as an important writer of Nepal, even though he's actually from India, from Kashmir, I believe, originally. So it was, he was a really wonderful person to know. When I was teaching in Bajong, occasionally we would see either the king's helicopter flying over to visit with him or the prime minister. And so the political leaders would visit with him to take consultation sometimes. So that was rather interesting. And then eventually the government decided he should not be living up at this 11,000 foot lek, and brought him down to a kuti in Kathmandu, and he was having an audience there once, and I was just sort of sitting there in the crowd, and he recognized me, and I studied Vipassana meditation, and I talked with him about that as well with Goenka, and so he referenced that, Mary, who does the Vipassana meditation. So it was quite nice to be recognized by him, but he was a real treasure to know.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. I think Vishnu Joshi is going to have some.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Mary. I was following you very like closely, for 2 reasons. One is I am from Kaptar Channa, actually. I was born right at the foothills of Kaptar, and my mom had taken me to get blessed by Kaptar Baba when I was a small kid, toddler. And she was actually having anemia, it seems, at that point. And he not only diagnosed that, also recommended some like radish and cabbage to take, that will help. But anyway, so right now I'm at University of Massachusetts doing my PhD in medicinal chemistry. So because of these 2 reasons, I was like very thrilled to hear your entire talk. One thing you talked about the Dalit thing in the Bajang, right? Dalit women who apparently seem to have a lot of freedom in terms of where they can marry or who partner they can choose, but they don't have money. Like they are like kind of marginalized in other ways. I mean, I have also observed this thing, I was thrilled that the thing which happened right in front of our eyes, and then you brought it to the world and did a lot of research in that, which we kind of tend to miss it. We tend to think only about the rocket and maybe Mars, when it comes to research. But when you were telling about these aspects, I was so thrilled. So my question actually is 2 questions actually. Maybe first one is, what's the way I can get your books? Are they available on Amazon or something? I would definitely read both of them. That's my first part. Second question is, when you were talking about the Ayurveda way of like the theory behind Ayurveda, right? The guna based, like balancing kapha and pitta. So as the modern, like being a medicinal chemist, right? The modern science will never, has not researched enough into that, and also those are not the quantifiable, very easily quantifiable aspects in terms of modern instruments. Or let's say I can do a cellular assay and find out the cellular toxicity of any plant-based thing, but that's not how Ayurveda works, right? So do you think, or do you know of, will there be a way to, like, there is a lot of Ayurvedic medicine works, but we don't have a known scientific explanation to that. That could be another problem, right? So do you think we can do some maybe slightly different kind of research to quantify those aspects, whatever imbalances and how it balances, so that we can give a different kind of medical footing to the traditional practice, so that it can become a mainstream science. I mean, it is mainstream science, but like there is always people have opinions about it. So these are my two questions.
Yeah, that's it's such an interesting question, and thank you very much for studying this area. And which campus? Amherst campus, or?
Yes, I'm in Amherst. Actually, I even tried to convince one of the nanoparticle professors here. The Ayurvedic medicine Chavanpras, right? Chavanpras,
Yes,
you must be
yes,
familiar. Like when
right.
you're telling about Triphala, I mean, those things, Harrobar Amla, are also in Chavanpras. But one of the things, it's originally in the text, it was supposed to be like, it can reverse the aging process, So one of the very debated ingredients of it is what's called Makardhwaja, a compound of mercury, So modern medicine recognizes mercury as a toxin. You will be never able to convince a biochemist that mercury can be medicine, orally. So I was trying to convince that professor, can we look at the nanoparticle properties if something pops up, why? But he also told me the same. You will never be able to convince this to the modern science, So that's. But the Ayurvedic people believe that there is a calcification process, and they chant some mantras and then empower that compound to reverse the aging process. So I mean, that's.
This is an interesting issue because to my knowledge, there's one paper that was written about mercury in Ayurvedic products. And if you look at that, if you scrutinize, and I'll share it with you, if you scrutinize that paper very closely, you'll find that it's a little bit misleading in some regards. And actually that which they labeled as toxicity was within the range of what is still okay. That's not to say it's okay to take mercury, but there are the chemistry of mercury. It's a little more nuanced because mercury can combine with other chemicals and etc. I believe with the Chyawanprash Amla, and back to an earlier question, I would love to try to grow Amla in South Florida. It's very, very high in vitamin C. And so that could be one of the sources of efficacy for the Chyawanprash. I wasn't aware that it had mercury. I know sometimes it's sold with that sort of silver.
Yes, the ones which are sold to US because the FDA doesn't approve, they don't have mercury in it. But if you go to the Indian market, like how they traditionally make it, it does have what they call it makardhwaj, compound of mercury.
Okay. Yeah. There are people who have attempted to try and objectify the guna and the dosha so as to evaluate them in a laboratory kind of situation. And I don't know if you've seen those papers that have attempted to do that. Another way to think of this is to think of the human in a more holistic way, and not to just to unpack why it is that we think efficacy is only measurable through some kind of biochemical process. Some of these drugs that are very, very strong and can have debilitating side effects, not the Ayurvedic drugs, but the modern Western medicines. So, the argument could be made that we need to think of the organism of the human body more synergistically, more holistically, rather than just at that cellular level. Of course, we're not naive. We know that that's the main way that science thinks that it does science. But I think that people are becoming more and more interested in actually moving from the genetics to the cellular and systems level. So that's been going on within the field of biology also. So I'd be happy to share with you places to find my book. It's, unfortunately they haven't published it yet in paperback, but I can probably get some extra copies and share it with you. It's an ebook at my library. You could request that your library, everybody out there who has a library affiliation, to obtain it as an ebook or as a book on the shelves as well. But please do email me. My email address is mcameron@fau.edu. And I'm sure Tulasi can share that with you as well.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
I can help, with that. Vishnuji, I can just, send
Or
you
somebody
her
can
email.
I have a lot of questions. I'll go offline because I'm from Bajang. So you seem to have done a lot of research there. So yeah.
That's really quite interesting conversations here. And Vishnuji has a lot of knowledge on that as well. That's really great. So here we have a couple of questions, a few questions from Rajji, and then there is another questions from Eknath Khatiodaji. So let's go with the first Rajji questions here. Says, I'm curious to know what percent of, it says, thank you very much, Dr. Mary, for giving the historical background and perspectives on Ayurvedic medicine. I'm curious to know what percent of people choose Ayurvedic medicine as the first treatment option. What are the reasons for not choosing? Do you think this Ayurvedic medicine is gaining popularity these days? I think these are the questions from him.
Yeah, so the resort to therapy is what we the terminology for how people choose which therapy to use first. It's pretty stable since I've been working in the field of medical anthropology. So it's usually the home care, followed by biomedicine, if people can afford it, followed by Ayurveda and or shamanism. That's probably the most typical route nowadays because you can get drugs you can get what would normally be prescription drugs over the counter relatively easily in Nepal. I'm not sure if that's still the case. I think they were trying to crack down on that, and some other people, some of my colleagues in England have studied that. But there's a very interesting study that just recently came out that found that more highly educated people turned not to biomedicine, but to the alternative therapies, and in particular, Ayurvedic medicine, as well as Tibetan medicine, Nepali people. So this is sort of an interesting phenomenon that with higher education comes sort of this assumption of a more modern person and modernity. And so that now to be modern means to turn to nature more than in the past. And so they will turn to Ayurvedic medicine before they will use biomedicine. So, and then also children will often be treated with Ayurvedic medicines, either through the Vaidya locally or through the Ayurvedic doctors before biomedicine. And it's interesting because there were some biomedical doctors that I interviewed, actually a pediatrician, who herself received Ayurvedic medicines from some of the Ayurvedic pharmaceutical companies, but she wouldn't use it because she didn't understand the dosage, or no dosage was given. She did not know what the plants were or anything like that. But there were many biomedical doctors, people with MD in modern medicine, who themselves used Ayurvedic medicine and or used it for their family members. So I always found that to be an interesting thing. Whereas the opposite is a little less true. The Ayurvedic doctors in Nepal anyway, with some variation, tend to be a little more on the purist side, particularly Dr. Kwarala, but they were all far more inclined to prescribe Ayurveda unless they recognized a situation that was acute and or chronic that needed to be done by one of their biomedical colleagues. So there was a lot of cross-referencing and referrals between those two communities. So it's almost a plural kind of medical system in one way you could think of it. Although once again, the Ministry of Health gives far less funding to Ayurveda than to modern medicine. But the resort patterns of resort are very interesting to study, as it might vary rural to urban, different ethnic communities and such. But people tend to think the problems with biomedicine, of course, are that people don't take the antibiotics for the full course, or there's indiscriminate use of antibiotics, which causes mutation problems. And the side effects can be very strong. And then, of course, hepatitis. Ayurveda claims to have a cure for hepatitis. And when I was a Peace Corps volunteer, we were told that Dr. Bajracharya, Bajracharya, I think was his name, if I'm recalling him correctly. We were told that you could go to see him for a cure for hepatitis because modern medicine and the staff at the embassy did not have any cures for hepatitis. So that's an area actually that the Nepal Research Council has done some research on as well.
Thank you, Dr. Mary, for the clarification.
That's interesting. Sometimes it seems like the Ayurvedic medicine that has been manufactured internationally seem to be, likely to replace Nepali Ayurvedic medicine at times. For example, I recently heard there is a product, Ganoderma product. I don't know how often you have heard about that. That has been manufactured in Malaysia, and then people have started marketing that, and they say that, oh, this is gonna work more effectively than Nepali Ayurvedic medicines. So I don't know, still there is kind of an international market encroachment even within that, Ayurvedic medicine context.
That's interesting. And of course,
yeah.
India is a big competitor also, because that border is so porous. I mean, Nepal belongs to many, many international conservation and trade and medicinal plants associations. But, the plants cross the border without regulation. So it's quite a problem. Another huge area of research really is the trade in medicinal plants. And I think I saw someone from WWF, I think that the World Wildlife Fund for Nature has been working in that area a little bit.
Definitely. Well. Before that, there was someone who raised.
Oh, there he is, right there. Yeah.
I think Eknath Khatiwada-ji, I think he has a questions before that.
Yeah, thank you, Tulsi-ji, and thank you, Dr. Mary Cameron, for your excellent presentation. Basically, I think Tulsi-ji already covered my question. Like I was 18 years ago, I was in this area like Dolpa, Mugu, Humla, Kalikot, and Jumla, and I was the one promoting this Ayurveda medicine enterprises, and I supported some industry there. But by then, I'm also observing very keenly. It's a huge industry, and these industries are still in the same in the pace. I have not seen much progress, and it's not been industrialized and commercialized, having all these opportunities. Though already you have covered all this, like previous Tulsi-ji already asked, but from your point of view, like we have done a lot of research. It is proven that this industry is huge, but it's not moving, and the international investors are not coming. Is there any way we can promote this industry that then we can show that the level of in the commercialization, so that we can encourage that the investor, or they can collaborate with the local industry? Or is there any government related kind of the policy issue that we can unlock so that this industry can move forward? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. The trade of plants should stay in Nepal, because actually even Singadurbar Vaidyakana sometimes sources out of India. And so when, Nepal could probably provide some of those plants. You all know what Singadurbar Vaidyakana is. That's actually, I believe, the oldest Ayurveda institution in the country. So I would be quite interested in moving forward in some way with trying to advocate for this. I did organize a panel during the annual conference in Kathmandu that Social Science Baja and ANHS co-sponsor, along with some other international organizations, called Nature and Health. And we got together a lot of people from all the various stakeholder groups, the Ayurveda community, the entrepreneurs. There are a lot of Ayurveda entrepreneurs who, pharmaceutical entrepreneurs, outside of Ramdev, who I hope is not monopolizing the market, but perhaps is. And just to promote the use of those resources within the country for the production of medicinal plants. I think it's a great idea. And please get in touch with me if you would like to, work on that. I've been thinking that I'd like to move forward with that. We couldn't go forward. It was hard to get funding. WHO supports this idea, but after writing a proposal, they seem to have put it in one of those files that doesn't get much attention. And then, other people, it just sort of became nascent. Oops. My daughter calling. I have to do a decline. Sorry, honey. Yeah, so please get in touch with me if you would like to
Thank you
talk
very
about
much for your
working on
answer.
that more.
I look forward
And
to
I have a
collaborate.
lot of resources on that as well.
Okay, thanks. Now we are almost, running out of time, so we will take 2 more questions, and we already have one hand raised from WWF. I don't know, I just cannot see the name here, so I'm sorry I could not, pronounce your name right here. I can't even see it. So it would be nice if you introduce yourself to us. Yes, let's start with that questions, and we'll take one more question after that.
And his name is Ekras Sigdel.
Hi, Mary. Thank you so much. Very insightful presentation. Very, I found this is very useful research, obviously. Yes, you are rightly pointed out that we don't have, our government is not giving much priority for this area. You see, based on my experience, we are doing, from the ethnobotanical perspective, obviously any loss of natural resource, these important plant species will have negative impact to the livelihood of poor women, Dalit, and indigenous communities. But we don't have evidence to what extent they have their relations between those plant species and those communities in terms of economy. If we do have some sort of value, if we do evaluate some economic value, do undertake the economic valuation of those plant species, then I'm sure, and if we communicate those economic value with the policymakers, I'm sure the policymaker will put more resources in this in the research and even for the conservation of those people and those plant species.
Yeah,
so do you have such kind of plan to undertake those the research in that aspect? Sorry.
Well, less formal academic research, but more, advocacy kind of work, formation of an NGO or something of that sort, or study groups. But one of the issues I found related to equality was that the conservation as development paradigm requires somebody to have land. So over in Elam, for example, Chiraito is a very high demand medicinal plant. Chiraito is growing on many private landowners' property, but people of Dalits are not typically landowners. And so they can't really participate effectively in that kind of a development program. Sometimes the government will permit the use of government land. And I believe that the forestry users groups, community forestry users groups also can permit the harvesting of plants in the forests that they control. And then they can also sometimes allow for the cultivation, but as you well know, it's quite strict. The government is quite strict about cultivating plants for human use on government land. But like I said, sometimes they will allow it. That's one issue that has to be addressed in terms of equal access to the resources.
Okay, great. So if there is one more questions from anybody else, let's take that one.
I have a question.
Okay, great. All right, let's go. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Cameron. Really, really insightful, and we are really honored to have you here and for your time and presenting to us. I'm a biochemist by training, and my take-home message from today, like you rightfully said, that even the geneticists, the biochemists have started moving towards the systems biology. So one gene, one protein approach has failed miserably. And we should not say that, like in modern medicine, we still go after a gene or a protein when it is known that there is some problem. But when it comes to human health, there is more appreciation for a holistic approach and understanding it as a whole, not like a few sets of genes or proteins. So I think the field is moving towards more acknowledgement and appreciation for what we have in terms of our traditional knowledge and traditional wisdom, and Ayurveda is definitely one of them. I have a quick question. I know we are running out of time. How is the funding situation? Do you feel comfortable in receiving funds that support the research that you would like to do? And what about the collaborative effort internationally? Because we heard from you, you are focusing on Himalayan region in Nepal. Like, are you connected with people in South Africa? Are you connected with people in Africa? Is there an international community? Because I am an outsider. I just wanted to know the funding situation and the global effort of advocacy, I'm using your term. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good question. There are a variety of different international organizations that work on questions of sustainability and conservation. They tend to be more academically oriented and looking at sort of the new political ecology and advancing theories to better critique what's going on in the world. And I'm sure that there are organizations that are concerned about the sustainability of healthcare systems in general. There's always shifting, this year we've been through COVID-19, and so alternative medicine, is probably not a lot of people's focus right now. There's the Asian Medical System, the Association for the Study of Asian Medical Systems, but again, mainly academic work rather than advocacy and policy kinds of approaches. So again, when I convened that workshop about 6 years ago in Kathmandu, there was a great deal of interest of the interdisciplinary type. And I think that my interest would be in, sort of containing it within the country of Nepal because of the Himalayan region and the high value of those plants and the need to really sort of protect them, as well as the impact of warming on the habitats for those particular plants. So there's almost an infinite number of issues related to this field. And certainly if anybody else knows of international organizations working in that area specifically to advance plural kind of healthcare systems that utilize the indigenous knowledge combined with sustainability issues. I would be really happy to hear about them, as well as groups within Nepal that are working in that area. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. It's been recognized for quite some years now. Dr. Tiwari was working in this area. So I've been kind of busy raising kids and working as a university professor, and haven't quite gotten back to keeping up with what's happening in Nepal in terms of policy and advance. But so I'm a little concerned to hear that it hasn't really progressed all that much. So maybe people need to start doing that in a more conscientious way.
Thank you, Dr. Cameron. Just being here despite your busy schedule, and at the same time, this conversation was very insightful. I thank everyone, those who attended the Zoom meeting and also were watching live on Facebook. Before we leave, I would like to request Dr. Tara Sigdel to wrap this session up.
Thank you, Dr. Acharya. I would like to thank Dr. Cameron one more time for her time and her knowledge that we all got to soak in today. Really, really honored. Thank you again. And all of you who joined us through Zoom and Facebook Live and stayed with us, I would like to thank from NIRI side and myself. This is just a series. NIRI is a very young organization. This is our 4th in the series. So Dr. Cameron became 4th speaker of our NIRI webinar series. We will continue. These are monthly webinars. We do have the natural science and social science. So we will, and then we will have occasionally, like Dr. Cameron, who will try to interface in between science and social science. And so that is what we would do. Please stay tuned, please stay connected. And there is a community. We would like to remain as a community, and this purpose is knowledge sharing. This Zoom and new tools that have become available to us really lets us connect from Europe, or connect people from Europe, Australia, Nepal, the US, the Southeast Asia. It's really amazing. And we are very happy and hope that we will remain connected. Thank you all, and have a nice weekend. Thank you.
And if I may, I also want to express my gratitude, and I'm quite inspired to see this research organization coming together like this. And I look forward to seeing you all on the NIRI website, also on Facebook, the Facebook site. So
absolutely, Dr. Cameron, thank you. And we will remain in touch, because NIRI's one of the objectives is to do research in Nepali context. So your knowledge, your experience will really help. Also, NIRI investigators will remain in touch with you. Like when we write some proposal to do some work, your help will be really appreciated.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Namaste. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Namaste. Bye-bye.